So thanks all for joining me tonight as we talk about amphibian ecology and monitoring here at North Branch Nature Center. And as we get into this, it's a beautiful time to be out and in the world thinking about amphibians. I want to rebrand this time of year not as mud season, but instead as salamander season, because there are many of these phenomenal, beautiful creatures that are right in our backyards, but often they don't overlap with our lives in ways that allow us to see them very often. And as we continue, these are the stars of the show tonight. It's our amphibians, our frogs, our toads, and my favorite, our salamanders. If you'll entertain me for just a second here as I go into the Greek roots of the word amphibian. Amphibian comes from two Greek words, amphi meaning both, and bios meaning lives. Amphibians have two lives, one on land and one on water. And while we might be most familiar with adult amphibians like this salamander here, being adorable, but also ferocious predators of the forest floor, woe is you to all the slugs and worms and bugs skittering around under the leaf litter for this ferocious predator, but they also have a larval stage where they're swimming around in ponds and devouring things that look like this: tiny fairy shrimp and copepods and scuds and amphipods and larval forms of a lot of the flying insects we know and love. Um, this strategy of a land phase and a water phase really allows them to be a big fish in a little pond twice in their lives. First, as they're in these little puddles where they are reared, and then they can go onto land as they outgrow the food there, as those habitats dry up, and they can proceed with their lives in our backyards here on land. Right now, as I look out in Montpelier, I see a lot of snow, and I just want to take a moment to think about what is happening with these amphibians right now. So, out my window, I see a couple inches of snow here, and below that is the leaf litter and the soil. The first amphibians we'll find are actually like very far up, close to the bottom of the snow, just a little bit of dirt and leaf litter. These are spring peepers and our wood frogs that are freeze tolerant, and they can freeze entirely solid like a froggy ice cube as they spend their time over winter. Another strategy, like the spotted salamander and the blue spotted salamander you see there, is to burrow below ground. They're not digging themselves, but instead using tunnels that are excavated by chipmunks or by mice, and they go below the frost line. So this is like 3 or 4 feet deep, about as deep as you would put a root cellar. That allows them to be cold all through winter, but to avoid freezing. And we're going to call back to this later as we think about when migration might be happening, because the answer is different based on the species and their overwintering strategy. So first, I want to introduce you to a couple characters. We'll do mainly three characters. There are many amphibians in the state, but we're going to focus on three. The first is perhaps my favorite, the spotted salamander. I think of this as really the mascot of the amphibian road crossing program, partly because it has exactly the right color scheme. It's black and gray with yellow dots, really reminiscent of a road, of a paved road, and it occurs all across Vermont. They're quite large. They can be here in our candy bar size scheme. They can be as large as a Snickers bar, like a king size Snickers bar. And while they're actually quite common, the state rank of them is common. They're not endangered or vulnerable, particularly. They're not often seen. I've only seen, and I've looked for them. I've only seen one outside of the migration season two times, and that's because of their habits. They're fossorial, meaning that they like to spend time underground, like a fossil, and they're nocturnal. Most amphibians have really moist skin, and it's important that they keep that moist and wet. So whenever there's danger of drying, like on a bright sunny day, those are habits and weather patterns that are not hospitable to many of our amphibians. So the spotted salamander avoids uh, the most drying conditions by going out at night. And by being underground and at night, even though they're quite common, it's uncommon for people to cross paths with them, which is one of the reasons that I tremendously love this project and this phenomenon of these big nights where amphibians are migrating in the spring, because that just allows people to go out and see these neighbors of ours that we don't have a chance to meet most days of the year. Next, we have the wood frog. These might be seen a little bit more. They're about the size of a Reese's peanut butter cup. The small ones being about the size of like the small Reese's peanut butter cups you might get at a parade or Halloween. And then the big ones about the size of a large Reese's peanut butter cup that you'd be really excited to get at Halloween. They're brown or beige, and they have this really unique raccoon mask or robber's mask. And then a fun identifying feature is this dorsal lateral ridge that runs from like their eyeball to back where their leg attaches. Um, I'll show you, I have a photo later where that works perfectly as camouflage and it looks just like the stem of a leaf. Like their name suggests, wood frogs live in the woods. And in there, they are eating insects, slugs, snails, spiders. They're also quite common. And while the spotted salamander was also common, the wood frogs you might see more. When I'm walking around in the woods, the first thing I notice often, if I'm going to come across a wood frog, is that I'll hear kind of the sound of them landing in dry leaves, or maybe I'll see a little bit of movement, and then I know to just stop and look and look and look. And honestly, I'm just hoping that it jumps again because they can be so, so well camouflaged that we don't see them. Our third character tonight is the four-toed salamander, and this is less widespread through the state. It's almost entirely in the Champlain Valley with a little bit along the Connecticut River. And they're about the size of a pack of Smarties. And they're from above, they're orange and speckled, but then they have this really distinct and beautiful bright white belly with kind of like constellation starbursts of black spots. And they're living in forests, especially forested wetlands in the Champlain Valley. And this is one of our rare salamanders and a species of greatest conservation need. Their populations are threatened, and it's a real treat and a real conservation win that there are some sites in our project where we'll see these every year and we can have a role in continuing to monitor them so that we know about the health of that population. A question, when I'm talking about body size, I mean the body without the tail. Um, Marty's, yes. Yeah. So we just talked, I introduced you to three characters, and now we're going to go through three different phases of their lives. First, where they live, then how they migrate, and then third, what their breeding behavior is like and the habitat they need for that. Returning to our spotted salamanders, as I said, these are nocturnal, living underground in rodent burrows and root channels, especially over winter, where they avoid freezing that way. Um, they're quite widespread in the forest floor, but if you're going to find them, you'll have to be looking where they can stay moist. So that's under logs and under rocks. And I have flipped a lot of logs and carefully put them back, and flipped a lot of rocks and carefully put them back. And I've been delighted by many, many salamanders in my time doing that. And just one time, I found a spotted salamander, and it was a delight, and I can't recommend it enough. And while their black and yellow spots look really obvious to us when they're standing on a black road or a gravel road, in the forest, it can really help break up their outline. So it's kind of a counterintuitive camouflage pattern, as you can see here. Next are wood frogs. This is classic habitat with cool stony stone wall there. But really, anywhere there's forest, you might find wood frogs, particularly through deciduous forests. And they are mostly nocturnal. They don't move around a lot during the day, but you could come across them. And then they're very loud in the spring. And here is a photo, like I said, of those dorsal lateral ridges looking just like the stem of a leaf. And then next we have our four-toed salamanders, which are quite hard to see outside of breeding season, partially because they're very rare. And they love these forested wetlands. And a cool fun fact about them is that they can actually drop their tail if they are grabbed by a predator or scared in some way. They can willfully detach their tail right where it meets their back legs, and then that tail will squiggle around, causing either distraction to the predator or kind of like scary and surprising. And folks will ask, does that hurt the salamander? And while they'll survive that, it is then also an open wound. So it's not the best thing. And there's all that caloric energy that's required to regrow that tail. Meanwhile, they don't have their one extra special escape mechanism during the time in which during the time in which they are regrowing that tail. So when we handle these, we handle them very carefully as to not scare them and cause them to drop their tail. And we'll have a little more instruction on how to do that later. So recalling back to where our amphibians are, uh, the spotted salamanders deep below the frost line, while the wood frog and the spring peeper here are frozen as froggy ice cubes above the frost line, just underneath the snow right now. That gets us a sense of when these might migrate, where very often I'll get the call in March. It was here in Montpelier, oh, let's see, not this Monday, 8 days ago. It was 59 degrees, and people were asking me, are amphibians migrating? And my first answer is no. And then my second answer is it depends. If a frog is sitting on top of the leaf litter, 59 degrees, and all the snow has melted, they may start to move. But for big nights to happen, and especially our salamanders that are deep underground, it takes a while, and especially rain, to bring that signal of warmer spring days all the way below ground. Some cues for this migration is soil temperature, air temperature, snowpack going away, and the first spring rains. Because remember, all these amphibians that we've talked about so far have that moist skin that needs to stay moist for them to be healthy. So they're really looking for those rainy nights. And while I said last week when it was 59 degrees here in Montpelier that amphibians wouldn't really be moving because we still had some snowpack at that point, and there hadn't been time for that signal of spring to reach all the way down to where the salamanders were overwintering. We did have some movement in the Champlain Valley at some sites, but then it stopped raining and we got colder weather. So it seems like, well, we haven't gotten any data from any of our sites there since that night of about March 16th. And while I list all these cues, it can be complicated and hard to predict for a human when amphibian migration is going to happen. And I do have rules. I say it's probably going to be in Montpelier, Vermont is a big state, the first rainy night in April after all but the most persistent of the snowbanks have melted. and it's over 40 degrees. But uh, while it's hard for humans to predict exactly when amphibian migration will be, it seems like the amphibians are often a lot all on the same page because there have been some studies where even 90% of the amphibians around a given pool will migrate within about a 5-day period. But I also want to reiterate that that is an exceptional case. Depending on the weather, you might see migration start as early as April 1st, and you'll have peaks, and it will taper, and then maybe another peak later. And it's all so site dependent, but amphibian migration will be happening at nights all the way into May, and towards the middle of May here in Montpelier. And sometimes these migrations can be really long. There have been tagging studies where individual spotted salamanders can move more than a quarter mile through dense woods. That doesn't sound very far from our human perspective, but if you think about just uh, how long a quarter mile is, if you're the size of a Snickers bar, it's really remarkable. And here I want to talk too about an important part of why they do this, making these long migrations. Sometimes people will come across a salamander or a frog on the road and see it going in the opposite direction of the closest wetland. And they'll ask or they'll be tempted to take that amphibian and put it towards the wetland, towards the wet puddle, the place where amphibians are breeding, thinking that that is the best thing to do because it's safe. But a small number of these salamanders and these frogs aren't going to the nearest wetland. Maybe they're going there, checking it out, and then moving on. And then the genetic diversity there's a win for genetic diversity when these salamanders and frogs go to ponds not that they were born in, not where they're sharing and competing with their siblings, but further and further and further. And those 1%, those half of 1% likelihoods that they win, that they find a new pond and spread their genetic material to a new population, are phenomenally important for the genetic well-being of the population as a whole. So, all that to say, the salamanders know where they're going, and we can help them cross the road in the direction that they're pointing. So this is a perfect, ideal setup for habitat configuration, where those amphibians can live their two lives, their wooded hillside life and then their wetland life, where they come and they breed and baby salamanders swim around and are terrors of all of the tiny snails and worms and dragonfly larvae that are inhabiting that wetland. But unfortunately, too often that arrangement isn't exactly what we see. I will say this is perfect in that the woodland is right next to the wetland here, but that wetland does look a little big for me. The whole point of the amphibian, of this classic salamander lifestyle, is to be a metaphorical big fish in a little pond at its whole life. It lives in a puddle where it is the apex predator, but if that puddle is big enough to be a pond or a lake, that might have fish in it. And if there are fish in it, even really small fish, those fish very quickly become the biggest fish in the little pond and start eating all of the larval salamanders, which can swim faster than a worm, but not as fast as a ferocious fish. So the real rock stars of salamander and frog breeding habitat for many of our species are vernal pools. There are many different ways to define a vernal pool, but the most important thing to think of is that in some years it dries all the way out. So this can look like a puddle. This could look like a drainage ditch. This could look like all sorts of different things, but they're phenomenally important habitat. And the amount of species that are unique and that rely on these is just truly phenomenal. There are great guides, books that are guides to just the diversity of vernal pools in the Northeast. They really are like coral reefs of Vermont. and New England. This is a map that our friends at the Vermont Center of Eco Studies put together, um, mapping all these potential vernal pools, and then they run a project that you're welcome to get involved with, where people will go out and check these predicted vernal pools to see if there is a vernal pool there. And then they have another project where people go back and go back and go back to make sure that those vernal pools, these really important breeding habitats, remain undeveloped and remain protected from impact. So this is what a vernal pool might look like through the spring, where at the end of winter, there will just be a little bit of open water and lots of snow and ice. Then as snow melts, the pool will fill up and get deeper and deeper. And it's right about at the second or third photo where we see amphibian migration happening most. These amphibians go to these pools, they lay their eggs, and in the brilliant abundance of these forest coral reefs, the baby frogs and baby salamanders are apex predators devouring all sorts of shrimp and tiny freshwater clams and worms, and all of the bugs um, that fall in from the surrounding forest. And then as summer progresses, especially a dry summer like this, they'll get smaller and smaller and smaller, and in many years, entirely disappear, entirely dry up. And a very cool thing is happening here for the developing frogs and salamanders. These are ectotherms, where their metabolism is based on um, the ambient temperature. So you can think of the drying pool as these baby frogs and salamanders gild needing water to breathe as they're developing in their smaller and smaller puddle before they metamorphose and have the equipment to live on land. They need to grow and grow and grow. But as that puddle is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, as they're getting closer and closer and closer to the deadline, that puddle is also getting warmer, probably, as a small puddle in the sun might. And that warmth is increasing their metabolism, allowing them to digest faster, to move faster, to hunt more efficiently. And their growth rate can skyrocket in those warm conditions until they pop out all their legs and go crawling on land, having abandoned their gills. So here we have breeding now, and we're back to the spotted salamanders, where males typically are the first to arrive at these breeding pools. They'll start to come out when there's even just a sliver of open water on some of these, because they're arriving there and they are going to fight. The males will go around and they'll lay these uh, they'll make these pedestals of mucus about that tall, and on top of those little pedestals, they'll put a packet of sperm called a spermatophore, and they'll compete with each other for the attention of females. And the males will kind of like do like a little salamander dance like this, be like, look how good my genes are. Look how good I am at finding bugs to eat. And the female will suss out in the dance party, the dance competition, the best dancer, and then go over to that spermatophore and grab it with an opening on her body, and then use that to fertilize up to 100 eggs that she'd be laying. And let's see, I have two videos here. Oh, they're so cool. Of just how prolific some of these breeding pools can be. Yeah, nice. There is a salamander swimming right out of the camera, swimming and doing a little salamander dance as all the magic is happening at that breeding pool. Oh, and another video. Um, the report that I had from this video is that like this was the place that this person stopped to film, but it was like this for like tens and tens and tens of yards. Like all along this ditch, there are just hundreds and hundreds of salamanders. You can see in the background those little white dots are the spermatophores, that mucus pedestal with a sperm packet on top. Wood frogs are a great sign of if migration has started. If you know of a vernal pool near you, you don't even have to go over and look to see if breeding migration has started and breeding has begun, because especially the males will arrive early and then they'll be so loud. Some people say that they sound like a duck, which I believe when there's only one or two of them. But with giant numbers of pools just become phenomenally loud and you can hear them from a mile away. That's actually a really great way to discover a vernal pool on a property that you're interested in, is to just walk around evening in late April and follow your ears to these pools. Um, Wood frogs will breed explosively with females laying over 700 eggs, and they will do so in sort of a communal manner where they'll all push their eggs in the same place and they will form these giant mats. Um, and the idea behind that part of it is that these eggs are delicious. Raccoons and possums, herons, all sorts of fish, if they're available, all sorts of birds might be eating these. There's even a great photo documented case of leeches going in and predating some of these eggs. And the thought being with these giant rafts is that the raccoons will start at the edge of the raft and eat hundreds of eggs and then get full and then come back the next day and eat hundreds of eggs. And those eggs in the middle might have a chance to turn into tadpoles and swim away and hide under the leaves. Next, we have our four-toed salamander, which um, of the three amphibian species I've promised to tell you about is the strangest of them in my mind, in the way in which they breed. They're also breeding in fishless wetlands, but they're not laying their eggs in the pool itself. They're instead laying them adjacent to the pool, or even better, in sphagnum moss on a stump overhanging the pool. Females will lay like 20 to 50 eggs, and then they'll guard those eggs. They'll stay around those eggs, and for something that's pretty unique among amphibians, provide quite a lot of maternal care as she'll stay there and fend off any mice, fend off any beetles that might be interested in eating those eggs. Like I was talking about the wood frog, it's a huge problem for these amphibians. Egg mortality is a huge problem for them because those eggs are really nutritious and stationary. So, in a rare instance of maternal care, the female in the four-toed salamanders will guard those eggs as they're in sphagnum moss rather than in water, so they don't have to worry about fish at that stage in their life. And then those eggs will hatch, and the teeny tiny larval salamanders that need liquid water, that need to swim around to go to the next phase of their life, they'll drop out of that sphagnum moss, plunk into the puddle directly below them, and then go about their little tadpole way or their larval salamander way. Now, I promised to tell you about three characters, but as I got to this breeding section, there is one character. I told you about three species. There's one other character that is so weird, I had to include it, and it looks like this. This could be a blue-spotted salamander, but what I'm talking about here is instead the unisexual complex of the Ambystoma genus. And this is a group of salamanders, and I can't say a species because they break every rule that you learned in high school biology, including blowing out of the water anything that you might have as a concept of what to draw a box around a species. All of these are female, and they also go to these vernal pools, and these females will use spermatophores of various species, of like up to 5 different species, to kick off something like asexual reproduction. They'll use the spermatophore, taking no part of its genetics necessarily, and then produce fertile eggs that are more or less clones of the mother. Now, it's also possible that this unisexual complex female would take that sperm and then incorporate that genetic material into her offspring. So instead of having one copy from mom and one copy from dad, they'll actually always have 2 copies from mom. I think that's true. And then sometimes a copy from dad, and then maybe sometimes a copy from another species, up to 5 copies of their genetic material. And they can lay egg masses that have mixed patterns, with some DNA coming from one species of father, some coming from another species of father, and then some that only have maternal DNA. And they have been doing this for at least 2.9 million years. So for like broad evolutionary context, that is 10 times as long as human beings have been a species. So this is wild and strange. It is the only reproductive system like this that we know in nature, and they're right here in Vermont. Actually, uh, because they interbreed with many of our different species in the US, and here in Vermont, it's the blue-spotted salamander and the Jefferson salamander. Pure blue-spotted salamanders with none of this uh, asexual, or excuse me, unisexual complex DNA in them are exceedingly rare and hard to identify. But in all this weirdness, you might ask, why? And whenever someone asks me the question, why, in an evolutionary context, the first thing I'll say is, that's not important. Evolution will do weird things, and we just get to see the things where the math works out long enough for them to stick around. But there is, if you're asking why does the math work out for 2.9 million plus years for these to stick around, there is a really fascinating answer there. And you'll have to forgive me again as I get deep into the biology of these. And it's this classic uh, biological problem called the twofold cost of males. In a population, anytime a male is born, there's first the cost of that male. The first cost of a male is that it wasn't a female. If you're thinking strategically about the species wanting to make more and more and more, so that there's more chances for it to persist, more chances for it to spread, every male that species produces is a loss, because males will not lay eggs, and they will not on their own make more of that critter. That's the first cost of males. The second cost in the twofold cost of males is that every male that's produced, not only are they not making any new any new offspring of that critter, they're also competing with all the females who have this hard and important job of reproducing and carrying on the species. So they're dead weights and they're competitive. But the unisexual complex is solving for that by having all of their offspring always be female. All of them can always lay eggs. And then this twofold cost of males, it comes in when people ask, why has sexual reproduction persisted? Why is it common? Because it's obviously so costly. And the answer to that tends to be that genetic diversity, and being able to move genetic diversity and all the ways that sexual reproduction can bring in more genetic diversity, is profoundly helpful for creating new combinations of genetic material so that these unique individuals can survive in new niches and the species can go in different directions. The unisexual complex, by stealing paternal DNA from different species, sort of solves this. If you're uh, unisexual complex salamander that looks like this, and you find yourself in a new area and you're surrounded by gray Jefferson salamanders, just left, right, and center, that's probably habitat that works really well to be a Jefferson salamander. So that unisexual ambystoma can take copies of sperm from those Jefferson salamanders and be like, here, let me give this to my all female offspring, and they can go on with that. It's wild, so cool, and right here in our backyards. I'm seeing one question. Do they all have blue spots? And do the blue spots gene take over no matter what other genetic material they have? Um, no, they don't all have blue spots. In Vermont, they might all have blue spots, but over the past couple decades, as we've done better genetics and we've realized that something that we used to call a species because of the way that it looks, once we do genetics and we're like, oh, that is not a unique species, instead, it's an all-female population that has taken three copies of this distinct species genetic material and then started to look like this. We've collapsed like a handful, like five or more different species that used to we used to say occurred in places where now they're just this unisexual complex that are all related to each other but are stealing paternal DNA from males in populations of species around them. Wild, wild stuff, and right in your backyard. But now we return to our vernal pool in its perfect arrangement with forest right next to wetland. But all too often in Vermont and in many developed places, it looks like this, where there is forest, there is wetland, but in between them is a road. And that can be a huge problem. While spotted salamanders can live like up to 10 years, um, this is a really dangerous thing for them, for their annual migration to reproduce. And as they slowly cross the road, they can be hit by cars, and just 10% of a population getting hit by cars can lead to the local extirpation, the local extinction of that population. So that is where we come in with this amphibian road crossing program. This program has a couple of goals. The first is to just increase public engagement in amphibian conservation. So for all of you here learning about amphibians on a Tuesday night, give yourself a pat on the back for helping achieve our goal. Second, we want to just directly decrease amphibian mortality at road crossing sites. This is a place where we can be immediately involved in conservation. We can go out there and we can save these individual frogs and salamanders. And then third, we want to inform transportation planning. We want to have the data so that people can put in wildlife crossing sites at the right place so that we can make change at that level. And then also, as this project has grown, it has just become more and more of an important contributor to just state biodiversity data. Monitoring projects in particular that we can say, this is what it was like in 2018 and this is what it's like in 2026 are phenomenal information for people doing large scale, statewide, region-wide, global biodiversity research. And we are committed to getting all of the checklists, all of the surveys that people go out and submit into a form that researchers can use for free anywhere in the world as they're doing their studies. And closer to home, big wins can look like this, where sometimes it's the case with like big infrastructure packages that there is money to put in wildlife crossings. And by having the data on where we're seeing lots of salamanders, where we're seeing lots of frogs, and especially where we're seeing them get hit by cars, we can help the state and help the federal government and municipalities put these in the places where they need to be. Because when that comes along, when money comes along to replace a culvert or to make a wildlife crossing structure, it might not have the time or the funding to do all of the studies to make sure that we know exactly where they are. I say that, and the state is actually very good at prioritizing these and has done some amazing work. One of the best is in Moncton, Vermont. This was a known site of tremendous, sad amphibian carnage with a huge wetland right across from a forest and a really busy road. And they installed this wildlife crossing structure that goes underneath the road. You can see those concrete walls that the frogs and salamanders can't go up, so they go along it. And then that wood um, keeps them from missing the tunnel and directs them underneath the tunnel. And then on a big night after this was installed, I'll play a video that shows just how many critters were using it. And it's actually a time lapse video. It's very hard to use trail cameras, game cameras to photograph amphibians because the way that those work is that they detect a warm body moving across a cold background. And since these animals are cold-blooded, that same technology doesn't work as well. But instead, here's a time lapse, and you can see all these little dots are individual salamanders. And I think each frame is 5 minutes. So these salamanders have all moved through, and there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds crossing under the structure. So that was a huge win. But some of these wins in terms of transportation planning don't have to have a lot of money involved. A huge goal of ours is to just talk about amphibians, talk about these like beautiful creatures and wild biology right in our backyard so that people know about them, so that they can think, oh, is it a rainy night in April? And so that we can create cultural change where people think twice about driving or that they plan routes that avoid wetlands if they do have to drive on a spring evening that's raining. So that's where we come in, where you come in. This project relies on folks going out to survey these sites. And it is beautiful in that it can be perfectly independent. You can bring your friend, bring your housemate, visit our website, and have everything that you need. At our website, northbranchnaturecenter.org/amphibian conservation, there's a manual with detailed instructions on this whole project and some really useful identification resources. But once you go there, you can also navigate to a map. And when you click into the map, it'll look like this with different circles of different colors. The red haven't been visited yet. So a lot of people, the birders among us who want to check off checklists, might go to these red dots, record a survey, and watch it as it turns yellow. The yellow ones have 5 or fewer surveys, and the green ones are places that people have been going to regularly, and we have 6 or more. I'll say all data is good data, so pick the site close to your house that suits you. It might be the case that you want to go and be a hero and go to a place where there are a lot of salamanders and a lot of cars to save the most salamanders, or you might have little ones and want to be showing them their first spotted salamander in the chillest and safest way possible. So you might pick a site that's on a dirt road that doesn't really go anywhere. So once you zoom in here, you'll see a pink line appear, and that shows you where the transect, where the survey starts and ends. And we really want to standardize this data collection. So these transects are all about the same size, and we ask that people follow the same protocol so that we can compare apples to apples. That makes a huge difference for the usefulness of our data in larger conservation planning and biodiversity protection. You can also click on these dots and they'll tell you important information like what sort of species are there, how many cars are regularly there, and even for those most competitive amongst us, you can get your name on the leaderboard as the surveyor with the most surveys. So once you know where you're going, visit sites, any site that you choose on any rainy night during early spring. Like I said, here in Montpelier, it's after about April 1st while it's raining and over 40 degrees. Walk your transect, record data on the site conditions and amphibians. So that is temperature, and it's all right here on our handy dandy data sheet. Um, and while you're there, you can take the amphibians off the road, helping escort them. If they're moving slowly, you're welcome to pick them up and put them down to the side. Or if they're hopping quite quickly, you don't have to catch them. You can just watch as they cross the road. And then we do ask that people take photos of the rare ones. So those are noted on our data sheet with an asterisk. But you're also welcome to just take photos of any ones that you're not sure of. We have a place on our website to submit those photos, and they go directly, excuse me, they go directly to me, and I can look through them and connect that with your survey, make sure the data is correct, and then send you an email being like, that frog you sent me, I had to look at three different books, and it's this. Um, every year, someone will send me a photo of a spring peeper that looks like no spring peeper that I've ever seen. So I talked to two or three herpetologists, professional frog people, before I'm like, okay, that was definitely just the weirdest spring peeper I've ever seen. So I really invite folks, if they're unsure, just take a photo and you'll get a friendly email from me. I love, I love April because it means I get like frog emails all day long. The other thing here too is that you should be removing road-killed amphibians, and that's for two purposes. One, we don't want to double count them. If you count a squished salamander on the way out, you shouldn't count it on the way back. You might know not to count it on the way back, but someone who arrives to the same transect 10 minutes after you to count and rescue amphibians wouldn't know that. So it's important for our data to remove roadkill amphibians. And then, even more importantly, ecologically, it's really important to remove those roadkill amphibians from the road because those roadkill amphibians on the roadway are potential food for predators and for scavengers. And we don't want a crow or a possum or a raccoon, or we've even seen bobcats at some of these crossing sites. We don't want them to be attracted to the roadway, to be attracted to danger, and risk them also becoming roadkill. So some people will bring a spatula with them to not have to touch the gross guts, and you can get a little more leverage to fling it off the roadway so that it can be safely consumed by a raccoon off the roadway shoulder. Or you can just scoot it with your boot. And then as you walk that transect, you get all the way to the end of the pink line. You'll take your data sheet, you'll flip it over, and then you'll do another survey for the way back on your way to the car. One thing I'll say too about our map, as you zoom in and see these pink lines, or you see the dots on the landscape, this is a great thing to just have in the back of your head as you're driving around. If you have to be driving on a rainy night in April, I really appreciate knowing where these crossing sites are so that I can plan a route around them and not be endangering these animals. Great. And then last, um, next step, you'll be entering your data. We have an online form where you can submit all your data. We don't accept paper data sheets, but instead putting them on the online form sends it straight to my inbox so I can look over it. And then that allows us to upload that data efficiently so that folks can use it for conservation planning, for even at the town level for conservation planning. And it can be uploaded for researchers to use all around the globe. And then congratulate yourself for helping amphibians at that site and all across Vermont. Some last notes on safety. For the amphibians, you'll want to keep your hands clean, and I have an asterisk there because you don't want them clean and like having remnant hand sanitizer on them or dish soap, but instead clean of anything that it would hurt to put in your eyes. Amphibian skin is incredibly sensitive. They're covered in a mucous membrane, just like our eyes or the inside of our mouths. So clean is washed with fresh water or even like dunked in the puddle at the side of the road, dunked in the environment that they're going through. The gold standard here might be to wear nitrile gloves if you have them around. And then also wet. We don't want these amphibians drying out. They need moist skin to breathe. And then keeping your hands low to the ground so that if this slimy, slippery creature or a slimy, slippery frog that is also great at jumping, if it evades your grasp, its fall to the ground is an inch or two rather than feet. And then to handle only when necessary. If the frog is quickly jumping across the road, you don't need to pick it up. I will say that if you've never seen a spotted salamander before, or you're with a kid whose mind is blown just to see this animal close up, I consider that uh, a necessary part of learning about these animals, connecting with them, and then caring more about them as we show up for conservation all throughout our lives. A great way to reduce impact on these amphibians if you do want to spend some time hanging out with it, I bring a clean Tupperware with me and I put a couple rocks and a little bit of water in it. And I might scoop the salamander up and then put it in my Tupperware. And then in my Tupperware, I can look at it and admire it and take photos. This is a rubber salamander. Take photos as it's just a little bored, and then I can put it on its way without any harm. And then keeping yourself safe. Bring flashlights, especially bright flashlights. I like to wear my brightest headlamp and then have an additional flashlight that I can use held low to kind of sweep across the roadway to see what's going on. And then reflective clothing is great. Um, these surveys happen at night on quiet roads often when it's raining. These are places where drivers maybe can't see that well and aren't necessarily expecting people. So being very reflective and bright is really important. This project can only continue as long as we have a stellar safety record. So please help us continue to do great work for amphibian conservation by keeping yourself safe. Um, in terms of like flashlight etiquette, rather than shine your flashlight directly at a car, what I like to do is maybe flash the car once so that they get a flash of the flashlight. Then I'll turn it on myself so that they can see me, and I'll step as far off the road as possible. I see a question about the flashlight causing them to freeze and stop crossing the road. I have seen that happen where my flashlight comes across them and they might like become confused and slow down or stop. Um, and you're welcome to just move your flashlight on and see if they keep going. But often it's the case with these cold-blooded animals that if it's 40 degrees, they might be moving at a really slow pace. So the change between your flashlight stopping them and the slow pace anyway isn't too much, and they could very much use the help quickly getting across the dangerous roadway. Great. Other things on there, a bucket. Some of these sites where hundreds of these amphibians are crossing per hour, rather than go one at a time, it becomes necessary to just count them and put them in a bucket and then do a bucket load, add 30 salamanders to your data sheet, and then go back and collect another bucket load and add 30 more salamanders to your data sheet. We're always doing this in a transect, so we're walking along the road, but there are times in which a bucket is very, very helpful. You can also print out the protocol from our website. I like to just keep it in my car for reference if I ever have any questions. Cool. Ooh, here we have a video of tremendous road crossing technique. You can see these folks, they're actually uh, walking kind of fast. Um, but you can see that their flashlights are directed at the roadway and they're making sure to cover the entire roadway as they walk along. And then some great amphibian scooping technique. So here we go. You can see that this salamander, um, I've heard the story of this particular video clip. It wasn't that it stopped because of the light. It had just found a puddle and decided that it needed to stop for a break. And these folks saw it with their light, walked away, and then it was still there hanging out right in this tire rut, which was the first puddle that it had come across in its dangerous journey. Gently scooped up from the sides, being careful not to grab it by the tail. And you can see the surveyor was doing a good effort towards the beginning to be calm and close to the ground with the salamander. This one was really not moving, so not struggling and in great risk of falling out of her hand. And then at the end there, she took it and moved it over the snowbank, which would have been a big obstacle for that cold salamander. Great. And then as we reach the end of this, how are we doing so far? Some stats. We have 1,238 surveys across 256 sites that have been surveyed. There are still dozens of sites that we don't have any data for yet. So if you want to turn one of those red dots yellow, I invite you to challenge yourself to do that if you can find yourself in the right place. And we've counted over 24,000 amphibians. At one point, we were on track to be the largest community-based amphibian counting project, rivaling iNaturalist in Vermont. But I didn't look at the numbers for tonight, and I think iNaturalist has really taken off. But I will proudly take number two for this project. Great. So now get signed up on our website, northbranchnaturecenter.org/amphibian conservation, and get out on rainy nights. There you on our website, you can see the map, you can see the volunteer protocols, you can sign up for our amphibian specific newsletter where I will be talking about nights that I think might have great amphibian movement and all the data that we've come in so far. So far, we have one report of amphibians at one of our monitored sites, and it was reported as a Jefferson salamander. And then I looked at it and I said, that looks kind of like a blue salamander. And then I looked at it harder and I realized that I cannot tell, and it's probably one of those hybrid unisexual salamanders that has Jefferson DNA and blue spotted DNA. And what a marvelous way to start our amphibian road crossing season. So, folks, if you want to, you can jump in with questions in the chat, and I'll try to address those for a couple minutes. I saw a question if there are any transects in the Northeast Kingdom. There are some. I set some up around Burke a couple years ago. And then another person asked what is involved in setting up a new transect. To set up a new transect, there's a button on our website where you can fill out a form that will direct me to set that transect up for you. You'll fill out the form, tell me some information about it, and then we'll do an email back and forth as I add new sites to the map, and we figure out where it's best to start and end those transects. Surveys being done in the Brattleboro area. I don't know. Let's see. I get Bennington and Brattleboro mixed up. I know Bonnievale has we helped Bonnievale Environmental Education Center start a program using our same protocol, and they're down that way. I also know over by Bennington there was a rock star surveyor who did like hundreds of surveys a couple years ago. So I know that there's a lot of sites over by Bennington. Oh, the cross. We just updated our website. I think the button for the crossing guard mailing list will be at the top left part of our website here, actually. I'm still on screen share. Let me see. Yeah, here we go. Join our amphibian crossing guard mailing list. And then here is the button to report a new amphibian road crossing. I'm gonna stop the share. Great. Thanks for your patience as I do Zoom admin. Where did the chat go? Great. Yeah, thanks all for coming. I'm really glad to see so many folks interested in this. Ooh, Talon asks, what time of night is best to start and stop? The amphibians need rain to migrate. And for them to reach the road, the rain needs to have been going on for a while. So we'll see actually in our data, some years we get very little, we get practically no data on amphibians. And you might be like, oh no, was 2023 a bad year for amphibians? And it was just the case that all the rain that spring came at 3 in the morning. And surveyors did not want to go out at 3 in the morning to start counting amphibians. And all the amphibians did fine. And while it hurts my heart to know that the amphibian migration that year was not witnessed, I'm also really glad that they all migrated at 2 or 3 in the morning because there's not a lot of road cars on the road at that point. Um, in terms of like strategizing to have a great productive crossing night, let it rain for half an hour before you go out. You can get some activity on just a damp evening, but persistent rain for an hour that you're like truly soaked and cold and miserable from will really help you. Great. Ooh. I got a question if there's similar programs in Mass. I don't know about Mass. Our site, I'm really proud of this program because it allows people to not have to contact us to get started. They can go to our website, check the map, and go out. And that has allowed us to really scale this. The only thing that is needed to add a new site is for me to like put the dot on a map and do a little bit of writing. And that has allowed our capacity to have 300 sites all across the state. Where if we were assigning individual volunteers to each of these sites, it's a huge headache for me sending 300 emails. But also, if a volunteer breaks an ankle or the person next door really wants to do that site, but it's already assigned to someone else, it makes for headaches. And we found that by putting it on the website for people to participate in this project as they are able and as they are interested really helps us scale this project. And we've helped groups in New Hampshire and in New York and across Vermont adapt this project for their own thing. So I don't know about Massachusetts, but you might see a really cool project coming out statewide in New York in the next couple of years. Printable material with photos about amphibians. Our volunteer protocol is a PDF on the website right underneath the road crossing map. You can print that out for some basic identification help. And then our friends at Crow's Path have, have produced this really excellent guide to amphibians in Vermont. Um, yeah, this is a great thing, and that's crowspath.org, or you might be able to get it at our friend's website, the Vermont Hurt Atlas, vtherpatlas.org. They're another group that our data goes to. Is it okay to do the same transect more than once in a night? Yes, that's awesome. Even encouraged. If there's great movement going on, just keep doing it. And at some point too, if sometimes I'll be out there and I'll do a transect twice, I'll do it 4 times. I'll keep doing it, and at some point I just want to hang out with the salamanders. There haven't been cars coming for a while. At that point, I just put the data sheets down and I might help amphibians cross to that point. I've gathered some data. It's important that all our data is apples to apples. So I'm always following the data protocol when I'm collecting data. But there are some times where I take a break from that and I just pause to do some photography or I pause to like admire this wild fossorial dragon-like creature. A question about hard winter and deep frost line. Will that affect how many amphibians we'll see? Um, I don't know. Yeah. I think the frogs and the salamanders are all right, though. Great. Well, folks, it seems like questions have trickled off. I'm gonna say goodnight here. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you can all get out and join this project on a cold, rainy night in April over 40 degrees after all but the most persistent of snowbanks have melted on a road near you. Thanks so much, and reach out to me at Ash at North Branch Nature Center if you have any questions after tonight. All right, thanks so much, everyone.